Howdy, folks, and welcome to Get NIST-y, the series that breaks compliance out of the checkbox trap and turns it into a real security advantage. No fluff, no FUD, just practical strategies to make compliance work for your MSP. I'm Jared Kasner, and I'm joined as always by my co-founder of Blacksmith InfoSec and co-host of Get NIST-y, Michael Zabarski.
Hey, everyone.
All right. So this week we have a really fun one. It's a follow-up question from last week's episode where we talked about automated evidence collection. And so if you missed last week's episode, go ahead and take a listen to that one. But in the meantime, we'll dive right into our first question for this week. Why does SOC 2 evidence collection still take so long when most of the data already exists in AWS, Microsoft 365, GitHub, ticketing systems, other places? Is the real problem the tools, the auditors, or the way that companies are trying to prove control operation? All right, Mike, you want to kick us off here?
Sure. Yes.
That's going to be a common answer for us.
Yeah. It's a mix, right? It's a mix of how you operationalize your security, where you have visibility. If you have anything that gives you centralized visibility, right? Is there a SIM in place where you don't have to pull logs from 30 different places where you can holistically look at everything and say, hey, here is logging for my environment to show that you're doing logging across everything, etc. Right? You're not having to go in and show logs in AWS and show logs in 365 and show logs in GitHub and show logs, etc. Like you can. So part of it is how do you operationalize security. Part of it is where, and I've seen this a number of times as people go through their SOC audits. The person actually collecting the evidence, do they know where the evidence lives? Because evidence sometimes lives in multiple places. And so, for example, this one MSP I was talking to, all their alerts are generated and go into their ticketing system. The person that I was talking with that was working in evidence collection wasn't going to the ticketing system to capture the stuff that was already in there. They were going to the systems and then looking through the audit logs for those alerts, right? So instead of going to one place to pull all the alerts, they're going to 20 different systems. So the problem can be the tools. Some tools make it really difficult to do things. I recently, I'm not going to call out tools by name here, but I recently encountered a tool that does not let you run a user report of like, hey, who are the users? There's no way to export that list or view the list. You can view the list, but you can't export it or run a report on it or anything else. And if it's a long list, taking a screenshot and scrolling and taking a screenshot and scrolling is not fun. And they've had a feature request for that for at least 7 years. So,
well, this is where you get tools like Snagit, where you can have it scroll the page, so you only have to take one screenshot. It does it all for you, right? That's obviously the answer, Mike. Come on.
Obviously.
But to your point, actually, not every tool also will pipe their log files into your SIM, and so tools like Microsoft for Office 365 and Azure and a lot of the bigger vendors will allow you to push all of your logs into your SIM. For those of you who have SIMs, not everybody has a centralized logging system or a SIM in place. And I'm differentiating. I'm saying both of those words because they are two different things, and you can use the centralized logging to kind of act as a SIM if you don't have a true SIM in place. But if you have a SIM where it's actually giving you the alerting and the additional information, great. But all of those things, neither of those things do you any good at all in this centralized world if your tools don't pass data into them. And so, as you're thinking about which vendors you work with, if the choice is between two vendors and one of them has that SIM integration or the ability to extract logs from it and get those into your centralized logging system, whether it's a SIM or just logs, and the prices are comparable, maybe you look at the one that offers the central logging system, right? So, like thinking about this as you're evaluating vendors, because evidence collection is, to Mike's point, not just at the individual tool level. There may be ways for you to collect all of that in one place that will make your life easier.
Yeah. And then from an auditor perspective, again, it depends who the auditor is, right? You're going to have some auditors, they're going to So I classify auditors into kind of three categories. I'm going to make some enemies here today. So I'm going to make some auditor enemies today. I classify auditors into kind of three categories. You have your novice auditor that has no clue about what systems are, what IT systems are, what they can do or not do, that you kind of have to train as they're auditing you. And that is a very painful experience where you're constantly having to push back on them because they're asking questions that really they shouldn't be asking or not understanding evidence, etc. Um, and again, this is not in a vacuum, right? They have senior auditors that work over them that as you push back, they will go to them and get clarification, etc. And it's a needed step, unfortunately, because like with everything else, you're going to start off as a tier one tech, you're going to start off as a junior developer, etc. But it can be a painful process sometimes. Then you have auditors that are really good and understand what the audit is asking for, what the evidence is, and how the evidence applies. And then you have auditors that are experienced and sticklers and will push back when you're completing the spirit of what you're needing to do and maybe not necessarily the way that they're expecting you to complete it. And so then it becomes a bigger discussion of no, but this is how it actually meets it, and whether that I is dotted or T is crossed. Guess what? The word is there, right?
Yep.
And so, yes, tooling auditors. What I skip here, or the way companies are trying to improve control operations, and that goes back to again scoping and what your workflow is and how you're managing your security program.
Yeah. Um, agree with everything you said. I'm going to put some subcategories of auditors in there because even with the good auditors that I've worked with, there are some that are more technical and some that are less technical.
Yep.
And so sometimes a really good auditor who is not super technical can get lost in the detail of and not know to ask about additional evidence because they don't understand the systems involved. And so, and that's true whether it's a SOC 2 auditor, a CMMC auditor, or somebody else. The auditor's job is not necessarily to understand the technology. It's incumbent on you and your security team to understand what systems and security and controls are in place. And one of the things that you sign when you sign up with an auditor is that you will represent your systems as fully and completely and honestly as possible. And so this is where I'd say less the way that companies are trying to prove control operation, although that's sort of wrapped up into this, but the way that you are trying to demonstrate evidence, if you are intentionally obfuscating evidence, missing evidence, things like that in a way that presents a picture to an auditor that is more flattering than it actually exists in reality, then you are doing yourselves a disservice. Now, it might get you that unqualified pass, meaning the auditor finds nothing wrong, which at the end of the day is what we are all hoping for when we go through an audit of any sort, is that they pat us on the back and tell us how amazing we are and let us move on with our lives. But what we're really trying to get out of an audit, especially an internal audit, where we're like, as I say this, especially as an internal audit, because those are typically used to prepare you for the external audit. You want to actually learn something from the audit so that you can get better. The audit is not a let's pat ourselves on the back and congratulate ourselves for doing a job well done, although sometimes that'll be the case. The audit is really to make sure that you are doing all the things that you said you're going to do and fix any deficiencies that you have so that you can continue to get better. And if you're not looking at yourself with a little bit of a magnifying glass, then you're really doing yourself a disservice. If you're not letting the auditor look at you with a magnifying glass and force you to defend the decisions that you are making, you are doing yourself a disservice and you're doing your clients a disservice. And so think about how you can actually improve, like use the audit to improve and get better. I just, all right, soapbox over, rant over. All right, Mike, like bring me back to reality.
Something earlier that I'm gonna quiz you on, and we covered this a couple of weeks back. But you said unqualified opinion. Why do I want my auditor to be unqualified, Jared?
So good question. With SOC 2, and actually really with all audits, there are essentially three categories of result. There is a fail, which is obvious. Like you just did not meet expectations. The other end of the spectrum is what we call an unqualified pass, meaning there are no qualifications. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm not qualifying the pass. I'm just saying everything that you said you were going to do, I found evidence that you are doing and doing consistently. And then there's a qualified pass, which is somewhere in between that says, yes, for the most part, you are doing what you said you were going to do. Here are the qualifications. Here are the specific places where you are deficient. And it's not so deficient that I'm going to fail you, but it's deficient in the sense that there were things that you needed to do to correct that. And so that's where that qualified versus unqualified pass comes in. And when you have a qualified pass, when I'm looking or when I'm reading a SOC 2 report and I see a qualified pass or I see any sort of here were deficiencies, what I then look at is what is the management response to that. So in all of these reports, you're going to have some sort of response from management that says, hey, the auditor found these specific deficiencies. Here's how we responded. Here are the specific things that we did to address those controls and those qualifications so that we can move back into the unqualified category and continue to do things the right way. And so, yes, thank you for picking up on that, Mike. Did I pass the quiz? Did I pass the quiz?
So what you're saying, Jared, is I want a qualified auditor, but an unqualified audit.
Yes. Not at all confusing, but yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Excellent.
Cool. All right. I think we beat this one to death. So let's move on with this. By all means, we saw this last week where we had the follow-up question. If there are still follow-up questions, please write back in blacksmithinfosec.com/ask. That's how we get the questions every week. So please get those questions into us. If we miss the mark or you have other questions, please get those in. But in the meantime, I'm going to jump into our second question for today. How do you know whether you're actually ready for a SOC 2 Type 2 versus emotionally ready because sales wants the logo yesterday? So let's start with a quick primer on Type 1 versus Type 2. A SOC 2 Type 1 is a point in time. Today, on this date and time, are you doing the things that you said you were going to do? A SOC 2 Type 2 is over a period of time. Have you consistently done those things that you said you were going to do along the way? And are you actually learning and can you show evidence over that entire window? And so typically with a Type 1, there's going to be specific things, and it gives you an opportunity to say, oh, well, we didn't have, for example, a penetration test today. It was outside of our audit window. So therefore, we're not. A SOC 2 Type 1 is going to be missing a lot of evidence, and a lot of evidence of controls because those things fall outside the audit window. With a Type 2, again, you may end up with some of that because a Type 2, most auditors will take a minimum of 4 months. Some of them will take 3 months, but generally speaking, they want at least 4 months to show sustained timing or sustained delivery. And so you're going to run into, again, some things that might fall out of scope because they're outside the audit window. And so where you really start to get some real value out of a SOC 2 audit is the first annual audit. Meaning it's looking at a full 12-month window, because then anything that is an annual exercise is going to be considered in scope for that audit. And that's where you're really going to see, maybe they're only doing an annual pen test. Maybe they're only doing annual vulnerability or annual risk register reviews. There's some things that aren't going to happen on an annual basis, especially at smaller companies, just from their own timing standpoint. And so that first SOC 2 Type 2 that's annual is going to be the most comprehensive one that you're going to be looking for, which is not to denigrate or take away from the early stage companies that do 3 months because they have that opportunity. And it's not to take anything away from somebody who does a Type 1 because, hey, we're just getting started and we want to essentially do the point in time audit. And we're going to say, today we're doing this, and we're going to come back 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now and get our Type 2 that shows that we not only had it on this date and time, but also every day in between there. So long-winded way of getting us ready to actually answer this question. So now that I've gone on my soapbox, Mike, go ahead and answer the question.
Excellent. I'm actually going to answer it completely differently. The short answer is when sales tells you that they need it, right? Because the reality of it is SOC 2 is building your security program towards a SOC 2 is good. getting the SOC 2 is a sales tool. You don't need to be certified for your own edification. You need it so that sales can work with clients and prove that you guys have the security practice in place. So working towards a SOC 2 as far as getting the processes and the people and everything else ready and the technology in place, absolutely. But until sales has a use case for you to actually go through the audit, you don't need to. So forget everything Jared just said. With caveats, right? You could go through it for someone to come in to actually validate that what you're doing is correct, which is very helpful, especially if you haven't been through this before. One of the things that I went through and Jared went through our first times going through SOC 2s was actually finding, to Jared's point, that process really helpful to flag anything where we're like, oh, we didn't think of this, etc. So working with auditors on that SOC 2 Type 1 especially to say, hey, here's the controls, here's what's in scope for SOC 2 Type 1 today, and what we're going to expect to see in 4 to 6 months that you may not have today. And then same thing in that 4 to 6 month window where it'll be like, hey, stuff could still be out of scope because it's done annually, as Jared said. But again, gets you thinking of, hey, I need to make sure I account for this for the first annual audit. So from a prep perspective, it can be helpful. From a cost perspective, auditors cost money. And so engaging with an audit firm before there's a sales use for it may be a wise choice, may not be. It depends on what the financial situation of the company is. And again, if it's something where you've been through it a number of times and you know what's kind of required, it becomes a lot easier to just align your security program to SOC 2 and say, hey, we're going to do everything we need to do because we've done this a couple dozen times. And then whenever you need to go through that audit, you go through that audit.
Well, even if you haven't been through it a couple dozen times, aligning to SOC 2 and just doing as much as you know about, right? Mike and I have talked about this before. It's a little bit like a retirement savings plan. If you wait until your sales team tells you, hey, we need a SOC 2 Type 2 in order to close this deal, if you wait until a year before you want to retire or the day you want to retire to start investing in your future, it's going to cost you an awful lot of money to get there. However, if you align yourself to the security program on day one, and again, you don't even need to align to SOC 2 on day one. If you align to NIST cybersecurity framework or CIS controls or any security framework, it's going to start you down a path that's going to make your overall security posture better, your risk profile lower, your ability to hit that audit when it comes up easier. And so to the extent that you know what those regulatory or contractual obligations are going to be in the future, aligning yourself to those things on day one or as early as possible in your journey will help you out. It'll also reduce the change fatigue, and it'll take your total cost of ownership way down. And so that way, when somebody comes along and your sales team comes along and says, hey, we need a SOC 2, or the government comes in and says, hey, you know that thing that used to be sort of optional is now completely mandatory, or your state comes along and says, like Massachusetts did not that long ago, every organization must have a written information security policy and evidence that they are following that. Oh, crap. Guess what? We better put something in place, right? And if you're starting from zero when that happens, you're going to be really miserable. If you instead are starting from 10, 20, 50, 80% of the way there because you've been doing the right things and investing in your security program from the beginning, the change management is going to be easier. The total cost of ownership is going to be easier. When the CFO says, all right, the contract is worth X thousands of dollars, how much is the audit? It's Y thousands of dollars. X minus Y is actually still a net positive for the sales deal. And we think it's going to unlock all this future business. Great, let's go ahead and spend the money on this. And it becomes a no-brainer for you to have those conversations. Whereas if you're waiting and it's, oh, the deal is only worth $10,000 and you want to spend $100,000 to get SOC 2 ready and get the audit done and everything else, guess what? It just doesn't make sense till we get 10 more of these $10,000 deals lined up, right?
Yeah, the other thing you can factor in as far as cost savings, right, is your time. Because even if you don't have SOC 2 today, but your clients are asking you vendor security questionnaires and you're spending, an hour a week filling out vendor security questionnaires, or 2 hours a week filling out vendor security questionnaires, depending on level of effort and number of clients, etc. And you can avoid all that by producing them with a SOC 2 report, right? Like all of this is cost offsets for going through the audit.
Yep. I will also just tell you that there are times where, and I've had this happen in the past, where I was CISO for an organization and a partnership deal came along and they asked for a SOC 2 report or SOC 2 attestation. And I said, look, we don't have one yet, but let me walk you through what we're doing as a security organization and how we are aligned to NIST cybersecurity framework and SOC 2. And I can talk through control by control with your security organization what we're doing. That will go a really long way also to avoiding some of those conversations. And what I've been able to do in the past is turn those conversations into we don't have it now, but we will get the audit done within X number of months after closing the contract. And that way you can actually recognize the revenue first and then use the revenue to pay for the audit, as opposed to having to pay for the audit and then hoping that actually leads to the revenue, right? So you can structure your deals in a way that, again, this comes back to, I am not a lawyer, but getting your lawyers involved. Most of the time, Michael and I will tell you, keep your lawyers as far away from your security program as you can, at least in terms of the policies and procedures that you're writing, because those are security documents, not legal documents, with some caveats. But this is a great opportunity for you to get your legal team involved to help you write and structure your contracts in a way that allow you to recognize the revenue first and use that revenue to pay for or offset the cost of the audit or the security program build out that you're doing, and put those two things hand in hand. And that way you're not having to come out of pocket for it.
All right.
Cool. Based on the look on Mike's face, I think we've probably sufficiently answered this question also.
Well, there's been a lot of SOC 2 over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. And so let me just, going back to our qualified versus unqualified, I'm going to qualify all of this by saying this is true whether it's SOC 2 or really any other security framework, right? Some of the security frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001 are contractual obligations that require an auditor to show some level of attestation for. There are other ones like CMMC that are regulatory requirements that you will need, again, a third-party auditor for. And a lot of this advice goes towards the regulatory ones as well, right? Whether that's state level, federal level, U.S., non-U.S. If you need a third-party auditor, the advice that we've given around SOC 2 over the last 2 weeks really applies very much towards all of these other frameworks. It's very transitive. That's the word I'm looking for.
Transportation.
Yeah.
Transylvania.
No, it's not Transylvania. It's transitive. These things will transition across all of them.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you enjoyed today's content, please share this episode with a friend. If you joined us for the first time, hitting that follow button helps others discover us in the future and means you won't miss an episode. And as always, you can submit your own questions at blacksmithinfosec.com/ask. See you guys next week.
Get NIST-y.